How great is our God. How sing with me, and how great is our God. And all will see how great is our God. How great.
This is Rev. Michelle Mann.
I have just run across some rather frightening and distressing news. Obama is going to use this, in my humble opinion, to create martial law, a police state out of America, without declaring a police state, without declaring martial law. He's going to do it through the CDC's quarantine proposal. In the government's Federal Register, under the control of communicable diseases, we have learned through GreenMedinfo about the forcible apprehension, forcible detainment, and even forcible vaccination for suspicion of infection by the CDC's quarantine proposal. Let me break it down for you. So you've had this dry cough for a couple days, but are otherwise feeling ready for your much-awaited annual trip to Utah. On the security line, an officer signals for you to come to him. Not knowing why you're being selected out of the crowd, you follow to learn you meet the criteria for quarantine. Does this sound like science fiction to you? In what appears to be an unprecedented power grab, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, and the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, just issued a proposed amendment to its domestic and foreign quarantine regulations, giving itself the power to legally apprehend, detain, isolate or quarantine, and treat, including to vaccinate, anyone simply for the suspicion of being infected by a communicable agent. Okay, talk about the horrors of an Orwellian society. The legal authority to isolate and quarantine, according to the CDC's own words, are police power functions derived from the right of the state to take action affecting individuals for the benefit of society. Incidentally, the CDC, HHS, police powers were not obtained democratically through the normal bottom-up legislative process and final congressional approval, but rather through the bypass of a presidential executive order. The new proposed CDC HHS regulations are contained in the Federal Register dated August 15, 2016, under the heading Control of Communicable Diseases, Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. Whereas previous regulations concerning quarantinable infection focused on extraordinarily rare and presumably lethal forms of infection, for instance, novel forms of H1N1 or Ebola virus, the new regulations carry a much broader and ominously more nebulous definition. And I quote, "By its terms, subsection A does not seek to limit the types of communicable diseases for which regulations may be enacted, but rather applies to all communicable diseases that may impact human health." So if you've got the common cold, if you've got a sore throat, if you've got some sinus drainage, you could be apprehended, taken in, forcibly detained, forcibly vaccinated for anything and everything. Do you see what kind of evil the CDC and HHS is up to? Going back to the article, the CDC HHS radically changed their definition of what constitutes an ill person by including a wide range of vague symptoms such as an ill appearance, even a headache, in lieu of objective signs. And now these very vague symptoms that could be anything are to be assessed by officials without medical training, for instance, flight attendants or transportation workers. Moreover, simply being identified as having been at risk of recent exposure makes one classifiable as having pre-communicable disease, which can thereby result in one's apprehension and quarantine. You don't even have to be ill or show any symptoms. They can declare you to be pre-communicable disease classifiable and apprehend you. HHS, CDC defines pre-communicable stage to mean the stage beginning upon an individual's earliest opportunity for exposure to an infectious agent and ending upon the individual entering or re-entering the communicable stage of the disease, or if the individual does not enter the communicable stage, the latest date at which the individual could reasonably be expected to have the potential to enter or re-enter the communicable stage. In other words, you can be detained indefinitely without any indication that you have any illness at all by the CDC and HHS. They can then be given the power to release you on conditional release and monitor you electronically, internet-based, through video chat, in-home, one-on-one, personal monitoring for the rest of your life. All by Obama's executive order. And the New World Order police state begins without even declaring martial law.
This is Rev. Michelle Mann. Thank you for watching, and God bless you.
Darkness tries to hide, and trembles at his voice. My heart and trembles at his voice. How great is our God? How great, how great.